Now that we start thinking a little bit about, I don't do New Year's resolutions. My New Year resolution is not to have any New Year's resolutions, but we kind of think about our last year a little bit, and we think about things in our lives, and a lot of those things going on, they've gone in our lives for a long time, things that maybe bother us, or things that we need to change, or things we need to do different. And this is kind of the time of year that maybe we start to think about that, but change is kind of hard, isn't it? We tend to be creatures of habit. We do the same things over and over and over, and we expect a different result. That's what I do. My wife says that's kind of stupid, She says, if you do it the same way 10 times, you're going to get the same result. I'm kind of slow to learn these things. Those of you that know me know I'm a little slow going, so I tend to make mistakes over and over in my life until I finally get it right. But maybe you guys aren't that way, but I kind of am. But there's a story in the book of Exodus, and it's about Moses and his, trying to get the children of Israel released and the plagues, and we know that story. But there's one of the most interesting ones to me is the plague of the frogs. I don't think that I necessarily like being around a lot of frogs. They're kind of slimy and they're kind of green and they croak a lot, but you kind of hear them in the spring. It's kind of nice, like spring's here. I hear the spring frogs, but I don't think I want them inside my house and inside my car and all over around. And one of the plagues that Moses put upon, or Lord put upon Egypt, was these frogs. But it's kind of an interesting scenario. These frogs came up from the land, and it says Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron and said, "Entreat the Lord that he remove the frogs from me and from my people, and I will let the people go, that they may sacrifice to the Lord." And Moses said to Pharaoh, he says, "The honor is yours. Tell me when I shall entreat for you and your servants and your people that the frogs be destroyed from you and your houses, and that they may be left only in the Nile." And I think the response of Pharaoh has always kind of intrigued me. He said, "Tomorrow." And I'm thinking, why would you say that, right? I mean, if there's frogs in your house and in your bed and in your kitchen, I think I'd want them gone now. I'd be calling Orkin, right? I want those frogs out of there right now, right this minute. When do you want them frogs to leave? Now is a good time, right, to get rid of those frogs. But Pharaoh says tomorrow, and this always kind of intrigued me why he said that. And one part of me thinks, well, maybe Pharaoh was thinking, if these frogs just go back home, then I don't have to give God no credit for it, so I'll give them a day to go away on their own. And hey, if they go away, good. I'll just say, God didn't do it. God didn't have anything to do with it. And maybe that's what it is. I don't know. Maybe on the other hand, maybe Pharaoh thought, there's no way these frogs can be gone tomorrow. Right? In other words, if I give God a month, the frogs would be gone. But if I say tomorrow, that's pretty fast, right? These frogs are everywhere. So, maybe Pharaoh's thinking, I'm going to say tomorrow. I want these frogs gone by tomorrow. You ever said that? I want this done by tomorrow, right? And maybe he thinks God couldn't do that. I really don't know what was in Pharaoh's mind when he said that, but I know if I was Pharaoh and those frogs were all over my house and my kitchen and my bed and everywhere, and Moses said, "You tell me when you want them frogs gone," I'd say, "I want them frogs gone now." Right? But it's funny, the things that are in my life and the things that we put in our lives that are bothersome to us, the things maybe we need to get rid of. And if you're like me, those of you that know me, you know that I procrastinate quite a bit. It's kind of my thing. Right? And maybe it's not a good thing, but I know I do. And the truth is that a lot of things I need to change about me, a lot of things I don't like about Rex, a lot of things I should probably do different. I think I'll do that tomorrow. But tomorrow never comes, right? I tried to join a procrastinators club one time, but we always said we'd meet tomorrow. We never met. So the truth is that, procrastination can kind of be a bad thing. But, the truth is, and there's a lot in this story, and a lot of things I think about when I read this story, a lot of things I think about when I consider that a lot of times, as with this case, a lot of our misery is our own making, isn't it? It's things that I do that I shouldn't do, things that I maybe would be better off if I didn't do it, right? But I do it. it's like at night when I'm sitting there and I'm like eating dinner and I'm like, I really want dessert. I know I shouldn't have dessert. I know I probably won't sleep good if I eat dessert. I know dessert's probably not good for me, but I'm going to have dessert, right? The truth is we do things a lot of times to put misery in our lives, but it's our own making. And then when I get home at night and get ready to go to sleep, and I'm laying there asleep, and I tell Susan, I just don't feel so good. She goes, well, you shouldn't have ate that 4 pieces of cake before you went to bed, right? So it's like, I kind of cause my own grief sometimes in my life. And I think we kind of do that, don't we? Pharaoh had these frogs in the land because he had already rejected the first plague, the turning the water into blood. He'd already rejected that. He hadn't let the people go. And so now these frogs come on the land. So, in a way, this was kind of Pharaoh's doing, essentially. It was kind of the misery that he had made. And now he gets the chance to get rid of that. He gets the chance to do something, make a decision to get rid of those. And yet now he puts it off. He procrastinates. He puts it off until tomorrow. In Romans chapter 2, it says, you therefore who teach another, you do not teach yourself. It's a fascinating thing about being a preacher. It's like being a dad, in a way. If you've ever had kids and you're a dad and you tell your kids something to do something and then they catch you not doing it or doing it, and they're like, well, you did it, right? Why don't you do what you say? Why don't you practice what you preach? You ever heard that? Well, when you're a preacher, that really gets home because, why don't you practice what you preach? Well, because we're human, and sometimes humans are kind of stupid, right? And so sometimes we don't always do what we should do, what we know to do. We don't always practice what we preach. Paul tells them in Romans, he says, don't you teach yourself? Haven't you learned anything? Haven't you found out anything that maybe you should be a little bit different than you are? It says, you who preach that one shall not steal, do you steal? You say one shall not commit adultery. Do you commit adultery? You abhor idols. Do you rob temples? The idea here is that why don't we listen to the wisdom that we have within ourselves, to the wisdom God gives us, to the wisdom that we know to be true? Over and over in my life, I cause myself a lot of misery because I simply don't listen to myself. I don't listen to what I preach. I don't practice what I preach. That we in our lives are adults where we need to have wisdom. We need to understand what's good for us, what's not good for us, the way we should live our lives, the things that we should do. Pharaoh had an opportunity to avoid all these plagues, didn't he? He had an opportunity not to go through any of them. All he had to do was simply let the children of Israel go. But Pharaoh didn't want to do that. Pharaoh had no desire to do that. Pharaoh didn't want to change. He didn't want it to be different. He didn't want to lose them slaves. He knew that would be bad for his country, be bad for him. He didn't want that to happen. Oftentimes things in our lives that we need to change, we know there's a price for change, don't we? We know there's a price for change. And sometimes we're not willing to pay the price to change the things in our life to make our lives better, even though we know once we got through that initial price of that change, our lives would be better. We would be in a better place. Life has a way of doing that to us, and Satan has a way of doing that to us. He deludes us. He tells us that, it's not going to hurt us one more day, one more time, one more night. We'll do it tomorrow. We'll do it next week. Eventually things will get better. And we're not proactive in it. We're not proactive in changing things in our lives and making our lives better and doing those things that will make things easier for us eventually. And that's difficult sometimes for us to think about. Why don't we preach to ourselves? But I got a little good news. And that's that God is a long-suffering God, isn't he? When Moses and these plagues started to come upon Israel, he didn't start with the worst thing, did he? He turned the water into blood, and that was bad, I'm sure. And then he put frogs on the land, which I'm sure that was a lot worse. And there's more things to come, right? There's more things to come, gnats and flies and lice and hail and all these other plagues that are going to come yet. But he didn't start with the worst thing, did he? He didn't start with the worst thing. Sometimes I think life is just this practice run, isn't it? We go through all these things as a child and a teenager and a young adult, and the older I get, You know, I was with my mother last night, and my mother's in a rehab and had this bad wreck, and she was talking last night. She's starting to get where she's a little more lucid in her conversation. And she was talking to us last night. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, and she goes, you know, one thing I've noticed about getting old is that everything that I'm going through, I can relate it to something that's happened in my life. And I think that's true, right? The older we get, the more experience we have, the more things that have gone on, the more we had to rely upon, don't we? And if we could somehow learn from our past, learn from our life, learn from living, we would not make some of these mistakes again. But sometimes we just don't seem to quite catch on. But God gives us opportunity, doesn't He? He gives us opportunity when we're young to make mistakes, and thankfully, we can get away with that sometimes, right? And we learn from that. And He gives us an opportunity as we get old to make mistakes. And hopefully we learn from that and we glean from that and we become wiser individuals. You know, God's long-suffering, isn't it? As long as we have breath, we have hope. We have chance. We have the opportunity. As long as we live, as long as we have breath, we have the opportunity to be different, to be more than what we are, to be better than what we are. And God desires us to be a better version of us, doesn't He? He desires us to be better than what we think sometimes that we can be. In 2 Peter it says, the Lord is not slow about His promise, as some count slowness, but is patient towards you. You know, He was patient with Pharaoh, wasn't He? He took time. These plagues consistently got worse, and yet Pharaoh continually, either God hardened his heart or Pharaoh hardened his heart. Always a big discussion about that. But he continually resisted what God said to do, didn't he? He continually resisted the direction that God was trying to get him to go. The truth is, though, is that God gave him a lot of opportunities before it got really bad. And God gives us a lot of opportunities in our life before it gets really bad. There's one thing I've really learned in the last few months of my life is that all of us have got a hard road ahead of us. You know, getting old is not for the faint. It's not for the feeble. Getting old is difficult. It brings a set of challenges all its own. You know, so much of my life, I've always talked about teens and the challenges of teenagers and young people, and I thought, they have so much challenge in their life, don't they? So much change in their life. They're trying to learn about relationships. They're trying to learn about education, about where they want to do, how they want to live their life, what they're going to do, you know, who they're going to marry, what their spouse is going to be. There's so many things when you're young that you have to navigate. And then when you kind of reach a point in your life, you kind of plateau, don't you? And things kind of you kind of have it figured out. You kind of know what your life's going to be, what your living's going to be, that kind of works out. And there's some little peaks and valleys, but it's pretty level, right? And then what I've learned in the last few months, well, I guess I've always known it, but I guess it's just really come home to me, is that as challenging as it is being a teenager, it's that much more challenging facing age and the things that come with that. When you start to get to that point in your life, there's such a challenge there. And yet God has given us tools to navigate. God's given us wisdom in the life that we've lived in order to do things and to navigate those things within our life. And so I think just the idea of Peter that God's not slow, that He wishes us all to come to repentance, I also think it's true that God is patient with us. And God knows we're only human, and God knows we make mistakes, and God knows we're going to struggle. And He's patient with us. He's willing to let us learn. He's willing to let us fall sometimes so we know how to get back up. He's willing to let things happen in our lives so that we can navigate other things within our lives. I think there's a lot with that. You know, why do we procrastinate? Why do we put off change? And I think that's a question I ask myself a lot. And I've tried to be better. I really have. And I joke a lot about I'm a procrastinator, and I know that I am, and I think all of us are to a large extent. I don't think there's a person in here that can honestly tell me you never put anything off. I think we all put things off. I mean, I think it's just human nature, right? But I've learned, and I've really tried to be better. My dad lived alone for many, many years. He and my mother had been divorced since I was 8 years old. And my dad's lived alone for many years, and he was always a bachelor. He was kind of the confirmed bachelor for a long time. And it was really funny when I would go stay with him, and something would fall on the floor, something would get dirty. He would just clean it right there because he says, you know, one thing you learn when you live alone is there's nobody to do it for you, right? In other words, if you don't do it, it's just not going to get done, right? And so I've tried to kind of put that in my life. When things happen, I try to do it right, try to take care of it right then. I'm going to get up, I'm going to do that right now. I'm really bad about sitting down and saying, well, I'll do that in a little while, and I've tried to be better. But the reason we procrastinate is, well, there's a lot of reasons, isn't there? Sometimes it's just laziness. Sometimes we just really don't have the energy, really don't have the want to get up and to do something, to make it happen, right? And sometimes it's because maybe we just don't want to start something and have to worry about finishing something. I know I hate that, right? I mean, you start it, once I start it, I got to finish, you know. But one reason we procrastinate is because about the really important things in our lives, things we really need to change, is because change is hard, isn't it? You know, when I change something in my life, there's always kind of a price. Either it's going to cost me some time, it's going to cost me some energy, it's going to cost me a relationship with someone, it's going to cost me something. And so it's easier to say, I don't want the conflict. You know, that's probably one of the biggest reasons I procrastinate with people, is because I just don't want the conflict. I don't want to have to deal with an argument or a disagreement. I think, well, if I just put it off long enough, maybe this will just go away, right? But the truth is, it hardly ever does. And I just agonize over stuff because I don't just deal with it when I need to deal with it. You know, Pharaoh, he had opportunity to get rid of those frogs now. God could have done it. He could have said, I want them frogs gone in the next hour, right? But he didn't do it, and it just puzzles me. Why would he not? Why did he put it off? But I think, why do I put things off, right? Why do I put things off? God teaches that the time is now, right? The time is now. Jesus said, sufficient for the day is the evil thereof. You know, he wants us to worry about today and not put it off till tomorrow. Because the truth is, we don't necessarily have tomorrow, do we? We're not promised that. We're only promised this day to do things, this day to make things right, this day to make changes in our lives. In 2 Corinthians, he says, at the acceptable time I listened to you, and on the day of salvation I helped you. Behold, now is the acceptable time. Now is the day of salvation. Now is the time. And that's something I think I need to put within my life sometimes, and maybe we all need to put within our lives sometimes. Now is the time. You know, we're sitting there thinking, boy, I sure need to call that person and check on them. You know, I do that, and my phone is literally it's right here. I mean, why do I do that? Why do I say, well, I sure need to call and check on that person. I'll do it later. I mean, it's right here, right here. All I got to do is call. All I got to do is text. And I don't. Why don't I do that? I don't know why I don't do that. I don't know. You tell me. I don't know what goes on within my brain sometimes. Because now's the time, right? Now's the time. And the longer I put it off, the worse it is. Why don't I just do it? I don't know. But I'm trying to be better. This is a lesson. This is the sermon about being better, right? This is a sermon about being better. To take care of that stuff. In Acts 22, when Paul's recounting his experience with Ananias, he says, why do you wait? Why do you wait? Why do you delay? Now is the time. Right now. You know, the Philippian jailer, so many people, I talked to him about the Lord, talked to him about salvation, they say, well, I want to get baptized, you know, in a couple of weeks, in a month. I want somebody to be here. I want to get some. And you know, I try to be considerate with that and understand people's feelings. And I understand some of the rationale behind that. I really do. And I'm not trying to be critical of it. But the truth is that if it's time to be saved, the time is now, right? The Philippian jailer at the middle of the night said, I need to be baptized. I mean, I could see 100 reasons why the Philippian jailer could say, wait till morning. I really could, right? Wait till it's daylight. I don't want to go into that old nasty water at night when I can't see what's in there and there ain't no lights or anything. But he did it that hour of the night. He went and did it. And there's a lesson in that for us, and that's that now is the time. Now's the time. Don't put it off. Don't procrastinate. Don't say you're going to wait until you get it better or wait till you get it figured out. I've had people that I talked to said, I really want to be saved. I really want to put the Lord on in baptism, but really I just need to live my life a little bit first. Well, the truth is that could be the worst mistake of your life. is putting off your salvation, putting off what you need to do. Because tomorrow may be too late, right? Some problems will not be solved without God's intervention. You know, I think that's one thing I see in this story. Maybe Pharaoh thought, if I just wait, if I just put it off a day, and then these frogs go away, then it's all good. I don't have to give any glory to God. I don't have to worry about Moses. It was all a scam. But if I set that time and it doesn't happen at that time, then I'm okay. If it's beyond that tomorrow, if it's earlier than that tomorrow, God didn't do it. But the truth is, them frogs was a problem God brought on Egypt, and a problem only God could take away from Egypt. There was no other way. You know, there's things in my life that only God can solve. I've determined that over the years. And although I procrastinate sometimes about doing things I need to do, one of the things I procrastinate the worst about problems in my life is that I sometimes fail to remember that the first thing I need to stop procrastinating about is praying for the problems in my life. You know, as much as there's things in my life I can change that will make my life better, I can do that's going to be better, I can quit putting off, and I understand that. There's also things in my life that I can't fix. I don't have the power. I don't have the ability. Doesn't matter how bad I want to, doesn't matter how hard I try, I'm never going to take care of these problems. God can take care of them. But you know one thing, the worst thing I do sometimes is I forget to put them right on the top of my prayer list. I put it off. I put off praying for those things that are so important. It's like when I think I need to call somebody, my phone's right here, and I'm like, why didn't I call them? And sometimes the problems in my life, I need to call God, and He's right there, and I'm not talking. I don't know why. You know, the first thing we should do with our problems is go to God. The first thing we should do is approach Him. Pharaoh had a problem here only God could fix. Only God could fix it. Moses had to cry out to God to get the frogs to perish from the land. Moses had to cry out to God to get it fixed, and yet, maybe Pharaoh still didn't understand who God was. I don't know. But even Rex, even in my life, somebody who should look towards God, I don't always do it. Why? Because I'm kind of like this guy, and yet I'm not like this guy. You know, this guy was a man who had power, didn't he? He had authority, this centurion. He had people under. Matter of fact, he even told the Lord. He even told him. He says, I say to this one, go, and he goes, to another, come, and he comes, and to my slave, do this, and he does it. This centurion had power. You know, sometimes that's the worst enemy in our life, is thinking we have the power sometimes to change things that we literally don't have the power to change. You know, that's Rex right there. Why don't I reach out to God first? Because I think, well, I can do it. I'm a big, strong guy. I'm a problem solver. I can take care of this. I can fix it. And I can't. So the first thing we need to do is call to the Lord. Call out to God. Quit putting off praying about things that don't seem that important to us. Or maybe we think it's not important enough for God, but it's important to us. You know, I struggle with that sometimes when I pray. I don't know if you ever do. Sometimes when I pray about my problems, I feel petty. I really do. Because the problems in my life, when I consider the scope of the problems in the world, and I know there's people that are literally fearing for their lives right now in this world, that literally think they're going to be killed, right? Going to lose their life. People who are starving to death in this world right now literally don't have any food to eat. And when I think about their prayers, how fervent they must be, can you imagine if you were in the middle of Gaza right now and the bombs are going off around you and the shelling and people are dying and buildings are falling down? How hard would you be praying for your life, for the lives of those people around you? If you were starving and you didn't have any food to eat, or your children were starving in front of you, how fervent would your prayer be to God to give you something? And sometimes when I'm praying, I think about the people all over the world, this very second in time, who are praying to God for things that make my problems seem not problems at all. And I almost become ashamed. And I think, how can I take God's time for my little problems when there's people who are literally praying for their very life right now? But I think we have to understand that God is a God of all of us. And that God is big enough to hear that person's plea that's begging, pleading for their life or their sustenance. And at the same time, He's able to hear the plea of Rex. Because God is a God of all of us. So I have to remind myself sometimes that even though my problems are not as big as another person's problems, some of your problems in here are way bigger than my problems. And I hope that I'm praying for those problems for you too. But to me, they're big problems. To me, they're important. And God loves me. He loves you. And so they're important to Him. God's a big God. God's a big God. And we need to understand that He cares about what we do, what we say, because tomorrow, truthfully, tomorrow may be a day too late. You know, if there's things in your life that are that important that you need to change, relationships that are broken, forgiveness that needs to be sought, salvation that needs to be obtained, if there's things within your life that threaten your soul, tomorrow may be too late. Today might be all you have. You know, I believe in giving my flowers to the living, and I hope you do too. If there's people you need to reach out and talk to, tomorrow might be too late. You need to do it. Because God only promises us now. The man who said, I'll tear down my barns. We know the story. And God says, this very night, your soul will be required of you. And who will have what you've built? You know, we don't think that way. None of us do. We all think we have tomorrow or the next day or the next year. We all think we have time. But all the time we have is now. Do we need to fix stuff? Yeah. Do we need to quit procrastinating about stuff? Yeah. But the main thing we need to be procrastinating about is our relationships with other people and our relationships with our God. Those two things are the only thing in the end that's going to be important. You know, why do we want frogs in our house one more night? I don't know. I don't. Because you know what? If you leave them in your house overnight, the next morning they're still going to be there. Right? Whatever problems you have when you lay your head down that night, more than likely when you wake up the next morning, they're still going to be there if you don't do something about it. The things you need to change, things I need to change, why do I put it off? I don't know. Why did Pharaoh say another night? I don't know. Because I don't want them frogs in my house another night. I hope you don't either. I want to know my salvation is secure. I want to know my relationship with God is secure. I want to know that I've made amends, that I've asked forgiveness, that I've made relationships in my life as good as I can make them. I want to know when I lay down my head at night, if I don't lift it up the next morning, I want to know that the important things in my life, my God, my family, my church family, I want to know that that's taken care of. The rest of it, I don't care. But I want that to be right when I lay my head down at night, and I hope you do too. And if there's things you need to change, now is the acceptable time. If we can help you in any way, won't you let it be known while we stand and sing?